QuickBooks Pro Plus Desktop 2022 OneNote Vendor Center. Get ready because we bookkeeping pros are moving up the hilltop with QuickBooks Pro Desktop 2022. Here we are in OneNote. If you have access to OneNote, would like to follow along, you're not required to, but if would like to, we're in the icon left-hand side, the Topic Introduction tab, down in the 1160 Vendor Center tab. Also note, when using OneNote, take a look at the Immersive Reader tool. Topic introductions, they're also in the text area, same name, same number, but with transcripts that can be translated into multiple different languages and either listened to or read in them. Also note, the topic introductions will have the same name and number as a presentation. Topic introductions designed to give a short introduction to the topic, provide then screenshots and links when applicable, and give an introduction to the accounting topics that could then complement what we're going to be doing in QuickBooks. Closing the icon on the left-hand side, we're looking at the Vendor Center. So we got the screenshots related to the Vendor Center. If you don't have access to QuickBooks or would like to just look at the screenshots to follow along, then you can use these as we go. First screenshot represents the entire home page as well as the open window related to it. We've been going through the center, so we're going to be looking at the home page by the flows. That's going to include the vendor section, customer section, employee section. We're focusing in, zooming in on the vendor section, looked at the flow related to the flow chart, and now we want to go to the vendor center, which either can be done by selecting the vendor center here or selecting the drop down for the vendors up top and then the vendor center, which looks like this. Here's the drop down. You go into that first item in the vendor center. I like the drop down better to use because the drop downs are always there even if you have other screens open. Here's an overview of the vendor center. Vendors on the left hand side. You got the two tabs for the vendors up top. You can open up a new vendor, add vendors here as you go. You could do some sorting of the vendors, looking at the vendors possibly by only those that have open items, for example, or you can have the vendors that are active, or you can have all vendors. Some vendors might be made inactive if they have activity in them. You don't want to delete them, therefore, but you don't want them in there anymore, so you want to clean up your vendors list. You might make them then inactive. So then we got the information for the vendors on the right. Then you have the data, the transaction data, most likely the most common screen you'll be looking at with regards to the vendor. Purchase order, bills, and paychecks are going to be the typical types of things we would see with the vendors because we're purchasing things from them. Got the contacts, the to-dos, the notes, and the sent mail in the vendor center. So here's going to be a little bit of a zoom in on the drop down for the sorting, all vendors, vendor activity, vendors with open balances. So you could sort your vendors in that format, which is kind of nice. Here's the overview of the vendors now sorted by just the open vendors now. So we got the vendors that have open items to sort. Here's going to be a new vendor. So if we were going to add a new vendor by going up top here to new vendors, you can see the new vendor data input. We'll get into this in a little bit more detail when we create a new company file, creating the new vendors. Possible that you don't need all the information with regards to the vendors when you add them, or you need minimal information if you're paying like the phone company or something. Just enough to pay the bill, really, and be able to track the vendor, unless it's a large company vendor for you, like someone you buy inventory from, where you want to have a lot more contact information on the sales side, customers, in other words. Usually you want a lot more contact information there if you can get it so that you can continue your marketing strategy and so on. Here's the SAT tab to the right, which is going to have some more information, kind of that information that we saw on the flow chart in the home page, which is the purchase order, the items, the bills, the pay bills, the checks, and so on. One of the more common items in the vendor section might be the bills, and this is another way that you could sort by basically type of transaction, which can be quite useful as well. If you're looking at the balance sheet, the major account that's going to be related to the cycle of the payables and the vendors in general is the accounts payable, representing what we owe to people, vendors. Then if we drill down on that accounts payable, we would want to look at it by who we owe the money to. Here's the total $26,000 by vendor, giving us the detail of this accounts payable. This then is a transaction or a ledger over and above the general ledger, which is with every account has like a general ledger. If you double click on it, the transaction detail report. This one has another ledger which is important because it breaks out the information by vendor. So again, we'll go into that activity in more detail in the presentation. Actually, in QuickBooks, you can use these screenshots to follow along if you so choose.